Are you interested in a homeschool nature study but not sure which one to choose? In this video, I'm going to compare two homeschool nature curriculums for early elementary students, Beautiful Feet Seasons Afield and General and Classical Nature Volume 1. Both curriculums emphasize fiction and nonfiction books, both have nature notebooks, both emphasize time outside in nature, both have experiments, and both have handicrafts. I'm going to compare each of these components of the program and deem a winner for each category, based on my personal opinion and homeschool mom style. Finally, I will give you a couple of notable differences between the two curriculums at the very end that you won't want to miss. My name is Koral from Relatable Homeschool Mom, and on this channel, we discuss all things homeschool. So I want to go over the basic structure of each program to frame the reference for our conversation as we're comparing them. So Beautiful Feet Seasons Afield, when looking at the table of contents, there are 6 sections, and then each section has 4 week-long lessons, making it a total of about 24 weeks. Each section is titled one of the stories in the complete Bramley Hedge collection. So this is a core storybook that you are reading, and it's even titled accordingly. So the first section is called Autumn Story, which is on page 69 on the Bramley Hedge. The High Hills is next on page 159, The Secret Staircase, Winter Story, and Spring Story. Then you can see that the week-long lessons are titled a word that is clearly tied to a nature theme of that lesson. So in the Autumn Story section, we have forage, preserve, decompose, and then that 4th week are special lessons. So we're going to just take a look at the Autumn Story, the forage lesson, to see what that looks like. So you start with your story, and the first lesson on that topic is reading one of the Bramley Hedge stories, the Autumn Story from the Bramley Hedge. The next lesson is a fieldwork activity where it is either going to be an experiment or a handicraft. Then you have a notebooking lesson, and that will include either your journal, and it always includes some sort of watercolor. And then the 4th day is a slow down and wander, which is when you have a lesson in nature that day. Now, in general and classical nature, if you're looking at the scope and sequence, you can see that it is split up into 3 terms. So term 1 is inland waterways, term 2, critters great and small, term 3, forests. And then within each term, there are 6 units, but each of those units, it is recommended that you spend 2 weeks on each unit, making it a total of 36 weeks to complete the curriculum. And then each unit has a topic, usually tied to an animal, such as amphibians or freshwater fish, or a tree, such as tree anatomy. And then in addition to the topic that you are learning, you are focused in each unit on completing attainments as discussed in the Charlotte Mason philosophy. And so each week you are either visiting a body of water or a view, and you are collecting leaves and flowers, again, as recommended by Charlotte Mason. So this is part of each week of the structure. So let's take a look at Unit 1, which is amphibians. You can see that in Unit 1, so over the course of 2 weeks, you're going to work on a memory statement based on that topic of amphibians. You'll have foreign language words based off that topic. You'll have your books that you're reading during those 2 weeks. And then there are the Charlotte Mason attainments that you will be following during that unit as well. Now, the order is not as specific. It doesn't say lesson 1, you do this, lesson 2, you do this, like it does with Beautiful Feet. But she does give several guidelines about how you could complete all of those things in the curriculum. So for a 4-day, 2-week schedule, it's organizing it that 2 days a week you will spend doing the general and classical nature over the course of 2 weeks, and then you'll complete your unit. The other thing that's worth noting is this program has officially been bundled with the kindergarten general and classical primer curriculum. And some people have been asking me, is it worth to get both of them together? And she has a really nice schedule in place if you are using both. So you can see, for example, Monday and Wednesday are your nature days where you're doing your outside exploration and you're working on your attainments, and you would be reading the books in the morning basket time. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays is when you're going to be focusing mostly on the general and classical primer curriculum where you're doing your stories and your art and music day. So general and classical nature can definitely be used in the older years because they have level 1, 2, and 3 memory statements, and also the notebooks component is leveled as well. So it can be used in older years, but it has officially been bundled in that kindergarten year, really just to make things easier and streamlined for all of us in terms of how to navigate the general and classical curriculum. Now for the fun part. I'm going to break down the main components of each program in more detail, and then I'm going to deem a winner for each of those sections or components of the curriculum. Let's start with the books. And Gentle and Classical Nature has term-long read-alouds. So I'm going to do level 1 because that's what I would be using with my kids, is you would read for term 1, Frog and Toad, and you would be reading just a little bit of that book during your morning basket time or whenever you do your scheduled read aloud time with your kids. And you're reading it over the course of a term. And then you have your core books. So you have your core nonfiction book, which you will read a couple of pages of during that unit based off the topic that you're studying. And then you have your core living books. Over and Under the Pond and Up and Down in the Dirt are the first two. These are shorter books that you might read every single unit for term 1. Ellie's Log is actually a longer tale that you wouldn't row the book. You wouldn't read it multiple times. You would also be reading a little bit of it every week for that term. It is very different in the Beautiful Feet approach. And Beautiful Feet is very specific. For example, in the week's lesson on preserve, you are reading the book Home in the Woods, and this book is very tied to that week's study of preserve. When looking at the book Home in the Woods, you can even see in the pictures that the kids in the story are preserving berries and fruit in their glass jars. In addition, the last lesson of the week, Slow Down and Wander, it is always scheduled during that nature lesson that you will read a section from the book Slow Down, 5 Mindful Moments in Nature. And in this example on preserve, you are learning about a fox who loves to eat berries from a bush. So which curriculum has the best approach with books? This one's pretty easy. To me, hands down, the Beautiful Feet Seasons Afield. The fact that the books are tied very directly into the theme make it, I think, easier for the child to really see those connections that you're learning about in nature and the books that you're reading about, and it'll really make that concept come alive. I feel pretty confident that my son will really understand the meaning of the word preserve by reading the book about preserving and learning about it that week. Whereas in the general and classical nature, it's more just general nature themes that you're reading through the course of your scheduled read aloud time, which if you follow the general and classical curriculums, it does make sense because the way that they have their curriculum is that you spend a lot of time reading aloud together during morning time. And so it really does fit into that model really nicely. But when you're just comparing the two curriculums in terms of a science nature curriculum, Beautiful Feet wins. Are you enjoying this comparison video? If so, I invite you to subscribe to my channel for more homeschool tips and trends. Next, we're going to talk about each curriculum's nature, journaling, or notebooking approach. We're going to go over the 2 different notebooking components in general and classical nature. The first one I would really consider more of a nature workbook than a typical open-ended notebooking approach. She does give you a really good schedule where day 1, you're going to do your nature nugget and creature corner. Nothing on day 2. Day 3, some copy work and work on your attainment. And day 4, narration and an additional activity. And then your project is scheduled in Unit 1, which we'll talk about later. So the nature nugget is an excerpt from Friends and Feathers and Fur in Unit 1. So this is very specific to the topic on amphibians. Then you here on the left have your creature corner. So now the student in the level 1 notebook, they can circle or point to the animals that belong to each other. In the level 2 version, there's a little bit more writing on this section. Then you have your daily poetry recitation, which this is one of the attainments that you're working on, the Charlotte Mason attainment that's related to poetry recitation. So every day you're practicing reciting a nature poem, and then every day you can check a box once you have done that recitation. And then every week or every unit, you have a memory statement based off your theme or based off the nature theme that you're learning. So this one, the memory statement for level 1 is tadpoles turn into froglets, then into frogs. And again, the next notebook, the higher level notebook, would have a little bit more challenging of a memory statement to learn. Then there's always a section where you can draw about what you've learned so far. Since this notebook is geared towards the younger students, the student would draw the topic that they want and then narrate that story to the parent, who would then write in the lines below what that child narrated. And again, this narration process in the notebook is also tied to the philosophies of Charlotte Mason in home education. And then there's a little frog life cycle chart that the student can practice filling out and learning about the frog life cycle. Now, the second notebook in General Classical Nature, I think of this more of a notebook because it's open-ended. It's a nature collection notebook. So this is where you're going to actually put all of the flowers or leaves that you've collected from the trees and the flowers that you're finding when you're going out into nature. And this is very specific, again, to the Charlotte Mason philosophy that a child of 6 should learn a dozen flowers, a dozen trees. And so through General and Classical Nature 1, in addition to Volume 2, you are going through and finding the trees and the flowers. And so you would paste them here. And then this is a section that you can also draw or paint the tree or the flower that you've collected. Zoom closely, look at it, and paint a little closer view of it. Practice describing the tree here as well. Okay, and then it starts over again to the next tree. So you have approximately 2 pages to complete over that unit or those 2 weeks. So the notebooking approach is pretty different in Beautiful Feet. So instead of a focus on drawing things in nature like you will see in the General and Classical, the focus is actually on watercolor. And the core book that you're using nearly every week is this Watercolor with Me in the Forest. And it'll tell you, so for example, in Preserve Lesson 3, it is telling you to turn to pages 100 and 101 to paint your own berry. I did notice that there might have been a new edition of this watercolor book that came out. And so page 100 is not the time that you are drawing or that you're painting a berry, but rather it's page 97 is whenever you are learning to paint a raspberry. So kind of a bummer that the page numbers are off a little bit, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. It took me an extra minute to flip through or go to the table of contents and find the section where you're painting a raspberry. And then the other component besides this book is you have a logbook, which I guess I didn't buy it. I probably saw that it was just a blank notebook and didn't buy it from Beautiful Feet themselves, but it's literally just a blank notebook. And there's many times in the curriculum that it's going to tell you what to do with that blank notebook. And then one of the things that you do is actually use these field notes and watercolor cards that come in this little pack right here. As for example, we can see that we have these Let's Jam field notes, where in the section where you're doing your field note, where you're learning about solids, liquids, and colloids, you draw components of it in there. And then it tells you to say, hey, you could tape it into your logbook as part of your journaling as well. The same thing with these watercolor cards. So in addition to the book, there's additional practice watercolor cards that you can practice, and then you could tape them into your logbook. Also, when you do your nature lessons, there will be times that it prompts you to say, take your berries and press them onto your journal, and here's what pigmentation is. And so it's more of this open-ended approach, and it's giving you prompts of what to put in this blank notebook. Now, which one is better? This was really tough for me. I had to really think about it because I love both. And I might love both equally for different reasons. The reason why I chose Beautiful Feet books, I'll be totally honest, is because of the watercolor approach. I liked that it was teaching that skill of watercolor, whereas in Gentle and Classical, it's just saying, hey, draw the tree, and it doesn't really do as much teaching on how to draw a tree, whereas I feel like this is very focused on teaching you some techniques on how to watercolor. So I would say from the arts integration, I do like Beautiful Feet better because I think that it's using this core book on how to paint nature with watercolor. I will say from an academic standpoint, I think I like the more organized structure of the notebooking approach in General and Classical. Although I think that an open-ended notebooking is a skill that our kids need to learn, like, hey, we're out in nature, so go ahead and, press some berries onto the notebook. Or, hey, we just practiced painting this over here. Why don't we staple it and put it into the notebook? I like that approach. So again, it's hard to say, but I think that as a mom, it's nice to just have the structure of the notebooking approach in General and Classical that every single unit you're going to do some copy work, some recitation, some drawing. Every single week you're going to have one specific plant or flower or tree that you're gathering and you're pasting it into the notebook. And I think when you know what to expect in your notebooking, it's more likely to happen. Whereas when it's more open-ended and sometimes you're doing one thing, sometimes you're doing another thing, sometimes that can feel a little bit more overwhelming when science is not the only thing that we're doing. We're doing a lot of other subjects as well. So in that way, academically, I think I like the organized structure of the notebooking approach in General and Classical. So next, we're going to discuss the overall nature study approach. Of course, it's all related to nature, the books that you're reading, the notebooking that you're doing. But I want to specifically dive into the parts that you're out in nature. So in General and Classical, everything that is happening in that curriculum is really driven by the philosophy that's in this book, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Including the nature studies, it's very much influenced by this philosophy. I've already mentioned the focus on the specific Charlotte Mason attainments where you're collecting the flowers and the tree leaves. And that is a part of the nature time, is actually going out and finding the milkweed in Unit 1. And it's organized. Every unit, you're either looking for one flower or one tree that you're collecting. But the other component of the nature curriculum where you're actually out in nature is again rooted in one of the Charlotte Mason attainments, specifically to describe any lake, river, pond, or island within easy reach, and to be able to describe 3 walks and 3 views. So in your nature time, you are going to a view, or you're taking a walk, or you're going to a nearby body of water and practicing describing that scene. And this is what is called picture painting, which is what is referenced in page 48 of this home education book. And it's being able to describe a scene with your eyes closed. So you're directed to take the child out to a scene or a view and have them look at the nature and then close their eyes and be able to describe that scene with their eyes closed. And so it's something that you can go back to that view over the course of a couple of weeks and practice this picture painting. The Beautiful Feet approach is similar to the notebooking approach, a little bit more open-ended. So instead of every week you're going to get a specific flower or go describe a view, you're usually going to go on a long walk with your foraging basket, but then what you do with that basket is different based on what it says in this book. And so on this preserve lesson, it is having you look for things that you might like to preserve and add them to your basket. Or maybe you pick one of the last summer flowers and press it into your logbook. So again, that notebooking component is really important during the slow down and wander time. You're looking for plants that might be juicy, smash them into the logbook, having you listen to the songs of the happy birds as they echo through the trees. And then I love this section here where it says, talking about the things that you might like to preserve, where you could go a little bit deeper here, preserving good memories or pictures that you want to preserve of the childhood that you have. So taking a deeper approach to the meaning of the word preserve in this lesson. And then it does give you a play section as well. And so in this play one is really fun, where you can set up an outdoor store similar to the book that you read that week in Home in the Woods. and pretending that you have a root cellar and pretending to preserve jars and just more of like a play-based approach to the outdoor time. And every single week it looks a little bit different. So for example, in pigment lesson 4, it wants you to take your magnifying glass and look for things out into nature. And so you're really going to experience nature differently in this curriculum. So which one is better? This is another really tough comparison for me. Since I haven't done either of them yet, I have to be honest and say I really don't know. I think that in my mind, on one hand, I think the general and classical structural approach is easier for me. But since I'm not very good at nature, it might be hard for me to find that tree that I'm supposed to find. And if I don't find it, that might stress me out. And so maybe it would actually be easier to just have the more open-ended nature approach that's in Beautiful Feet, where we just go out, we try to find something to preserve and think of it more as a menu rather than any sort of strict thing that we have to go out and do in nature. And in that way, it could be a little easier and fun. So I know this is a bit of a cop-out, but I just really don't know which one I like better yet. Now let's analyze the science experiments. So in general and classical nature, she has what's called projects. Every term you have one scheduled project that you are doing throughout that term. The term projects are raising a caterpillar and watching it become a butterfly, raising an ant farm, and making a terrarium. Pages 56 and 57 of this book goes over these concepts on living creatures and that nature should bring interest and delight to children and that they should be encouraged to watch. And so this is a more slower paced nature approach that you're watching the caterpillar turn into a butterfly and learning about that. So in a way, I'm calling it an experiment, but she's really thinking of it more as a project. The Beautiful Feet has more traditional scheduled experiments scheduled in, and these are in the field work lesson. So every week you have a field work activity. So looking here on winter lesson 2, I love this one. You are making Ben Franklin's thermometer, and you actually get to make a thermometer using a bottle and a straw. You are going to be checking for liquid rising or falling within the straw 3 times each day, marking the outside of the bottle each time you check, M for morning, N for noon, E for evening, and then you're recording what you notice on your thermometer field notes, and then you can add some of your observations into your logbook. So that's a more typical science-y experiment. Again, I like both approaches. They're really different. One is more of a let's watch nature and learn from nature, and one is more of that traditional experiment. From an academic standpoint, I do think that the Beautiful Feet is a little bit stronger because it is guiding you on what to do with these experiments by taking notes, making observations. Whereas the butterfly project, there's a little bit of work in your notebooking, but it's not as academic, I would say, as Beautiful Feet. So if that's important to you, then I do think that the science component in the experiments is a bit stronger in Beautiful Feet. Now, in looking at the handicrafts, which the Beautiful Feet calls it a handcraft and the General and Classical Nature calls it a handicraft. So I'm going to go over the Beautiful Feet handicraft first. So also in the field work, it sort of rotates between more of a sciencey experiment and a hand. So earlier I mentioned the thermometer lesson, which is more of a traditional science experiment. But if you go over to the next lesson in page 52 and look at the fieldwork activity, you are making a pine cone bird feeder, which I would say is more of a handcraft than it is a science experiment. And that sometimes it's an experiment, sometimes it's a handcraft. In addition, after every 3 weeks, you have special lessons. And in those special lessons, there's always an additional handcraft that you could do. So in the winter lesson, the handcraft is that you are making this wreath for the birds so that they can eat. And now, General and Classical, she gives you a list of handicrafts ideas, bolds the ones that are more nature related, such as photography. They're more general handicraft ideas. And the idea is that you will take time every day or every other day to practice your handicrafts in your homeschool day. For example, if you have a child that wants to do watercolor painting or wants to get good at watercolor painting, you could potentially get this watercolor with me in the forest book and have them do that every couple of days, practice watercoloring. And she recommends that you stick to that same handicraft every day for the whole term. And then the next term, maybe you would choose something else like drawing or photography. And so, very different approach. I would say, from the standpoint of it all tying together, Beautiful Feet does a better job. The handicrafts that you're doing in the curriculum directly tie into the theme of the lesson. The preserve lesson, you are making jam to practice preserving. So from that standpoint, it is a bit stronger of a correlation of the entire lesson. Now, I think general and classical nature is not making that a huge core component. They're more focused on really getting those attainments accomplished rather than a specific handicraft. So which one is better? I think that from a, again, academic standpoint of tying everything together, Beautiful Feet really does do a better job. It has a craft or an experiment that is very directly tied into the lesson that you're learning. Whereas general and classical, the handicraft is more general, just focus on something maybe nature related, maybe not nature related. It is really not tied into the theme really at all. So if that's important to you to really have it all tied together, then I do think that Beautiful Feet approach is a stronger approach. However, we all probably know this. A lot of curriculums that we have do have an art component or have crafts tied to what we're learning. And so if you already have curriculums full of projects that are tying to what you're studying, then it may feel a little bit overwhelming in the Beautiful Feet books. That's how I feel a little bit. I think that when I do this curriculum, I'm going to look through them and maybe pick some of them. Like, I know I want to make the jam. That's something we like to do, but I probably won't do every handcraft that's scheduled. I doubt that they necessarily recommend that either. I think they also do say this in the Beautiful Feet curriculum to take some things and leave some other things. So I think that's totally fine. I do wish that they had a craft and science kit that you could buy with Beautiful Feet, because I do find personally that these fieldwork activities can feel a little much. You have to get the supplies a lot of the times, and then you have to actually do the activity. And so if there was a craft kit that I could just say, hey, get out, everything for this lesson, I think that would make it easier and less overwhelming for me. So I do like that general and classical takes the handicraft approach in a little bit less overwhelming of a way, and just that it's more open-ended. And if you're doing a lot of the general and classical curriculums, there are so many other opportunities to do handcrafts or handicrafts. And so it's really not lacking if the crafts aren't tied into the lesson, in my mind, because there's already so much out there. So personally, I like the general and classical approach better. I'm not a very artsy person. Having to gather all the supplies and feel pressure to make this craft is a bit overwhelming for me. So telling my kids, hey, let's just work on drawing every day or whatever they're interested in, making it more of an interest-led approach, I kind of like that better personally. Although from a complete arts integrations approach, Beautiful Feet is better. And if that's important to you, then you will get that in Beautiful Feet. Now, the final notable differences about the two curriculums is that general and classical does focus on a little bit of foreign language. And that's again because of the Charlotte Mason attainment about knowing some of French. So she includes some French memory statements, but she also includes Spanish just because that's a more common foreign language. The general and classical curriculum has nature poem recitations, which again, that's a component of Charlotte Mason that the Beautiful Feet does not have the nature poem recitations. And then the classic component of the memory statements that relate to the topic that you're studying. I love the general and classical memory statements, especially for the younger years, because it's helping the child really put to words what is it that they're learning about the amphibians or the butterflies. So those are things that are very different about general and classical that Beautiful Feet doesn't have. Now, what Beautiful Feet has in their curriculum is it does include a picture study for all of the special lessons. So again, every 4 weeks you have special lessons, and it always includes a picture study, which is related to nature. And I really like the picture study. I think it's well done, and it's easy to implement because it's just right there in the book. You can look at it together, and it's just easy to incorporate that in the curriculum. And then it also has seasonal recipes. The curriculum is called Beautiful Feet Seasons Afield. So the special lessons will include additional recipes, which I am personally way more into recipes than I am crafts because you get to eat them. And so I love those seasonal recipes, and I'm excited to incorporate that in the lessons. So that's it for the comparison between the two curriculums. If you had to choose one nature curriculum, which one would you choose and why? Put it into comments. Thank you.